Hello, I'm Claire Smith and welcome to my channel. So in today's video I'm going to be trying what is probably one of the world's oldest fragrances still in some form of production. I'm also going to be trying Vesper Lynd's fragrance in Casino Royale in the James Bond film. And the brand that I'm going to be trying is actually called Santa Maria Novella. So I've bought their discovery set and I got a couple of free samples along with it. So I've got 10 fragrances from Santa Maria Novella to talk to you about in total. If you haven't seen me before, I'm Claire Smith. I make videos all about perfume, perfume science, perfume history, perfume psychology even, and I also just do some straight perfume reviews just like this one, and also fun perfume tags. So if that kind of thing interests you and you haven't already done so, then please do consider subscribing, and please also like this video if you do enjoy this kind of content. So Santa Maria Novella are actually a brand that grew out of a monastery. So monks would grow herbs and make lotions and potions for people who were ill, and really the perfumery grew from their herb garden. You can still go and visit their herb garden, and I actually went to this monastery in 2019 when I visited Florence, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So yeah, definitely worth checking out if you are ever there. So Santa Maria Novella was actually founded all the way back in 1221, so over 800 years ago. So because of Santa Maria Novella's heritage, their style of their fragrances and their location, their fragrances mainly come in an eau de cologne format, and that's what's in their discovery set. Their newer fragrances tend to be eau de parfum, and I have 2 of those to talk about in this video, but their discovery set contains 8 fragrances in the eau de cologne formulation. I have to say, some of these are extremely fleeting, other ones tend to persist for a very long time, and it doesn't seem to be dependent entirely on the concentration of the fragrance. If you're looking for a standard designer fragrance, this is not going to be for you. These fragrances really have a very vintage feel, and they're all in a very particular style. I really feel like their style really reflects traditional Italian perfumery. Their discovery set, which I bought, costs £25, including free delivery when you sign up for their newsletter, which is what I did. And along with that discovery set, which contains 8 fragrances, you get to choose 2 different samples, and I chose 2 of their EDPs to try, which I'll also discuss at the end of the video. So I think £25 to try out 10 of their fragrances is really reasonably priced. Also, I was looking at the price of their full bottles, and they start from around £85 for 50ml in case you are interested. But I'm just going to walk you through each of these fragrances in turn now, tell you what I thought of them, and I'm also going to rank the fragrances at the end of the video. So the first fragrance is actually one of the ones I was most curious about, and it's called Acqua Della Regina, which means the water of the Queen. So this fragrance is based on the fragrance that was made for Catherine of Medici in 1533, and Catherine was a very notorious figure. She was someone who was known to be completely ruthless, and she's actually reported to have killed somebody by sending them scented gloves with poison on. And really, she was a very successful person. The Medicis in medieval times were notorious for marrying their sons and their daughters to the medieval houses of Europe, and she was no exception. She ended up marrying the King of France, Henry of Valois. So this fragrance is actually a neroli-based fragrance. It's very much a green, citrusy fragrance, and that's appropriate because Catherine of Medici was known as La Nerola, or the person who wears neroli. So this opens quite green and citrusy. It really is based around neroli, petitgrain, something like that. But as this dries down, the brightness of the citrus really fades. It becomes more dull, more herbal. I think really I'd better describe this as more aromatic. It smells like something Mediterranean. It's grey and silvery green in feel. And as this dries further, you get left with a slightly soapy musk, but still with that sort of slight bitterness as well on top. I thought this fragrance was really quite refreshing, and I thought it was sort of along the same lines as other eau de colognes that I've tried. So things like Acqua de Parma Colonia, things like 4711 eau de cologne. But I would say in comparison to those, this fragrance was less sharp than 4711, and it was also less soapy than Colonia. And I think out of the 3, I thought this one was the nicest for me. I really like this fragrance actually. I think, with eau de colognes, you don't expect them to last that long, and this did quite well. This lasted about 2 hours on my skin, and I actually thought this was actually quite strong whilst it was present. I think I would be quite happy to respray this one throughout the day. I did get that feeling of it being refreshing and uplifting, and it feels a very universal fragrance. It feels like a fragrance that most people would like. I think if you like eau de cologne, if you like Colonia, you'll probably be very likely to like this one too. So that's Acqua, Della, Regina. So the next fragrance is called Fresia, and unsurprisingly, Fresia begins with freesia. It's really floral and also quite sweet, and underneath that sweetness, there's sort of a nectary feel, but also a powderiness. And the powderiness is really complemented by a very classic, very pink rose. And the rose is supported by sort of a powdery iris underneath, a chalky iris feeling. This one actually made me think a lot of those 80s, 90s soaps that were made by Bromley. And I always associate those with Christmas. So I get like a Christmas morning kind of feel to this fragrance, because those are the kinds of things you'd open in presents in the late 80s and the early 90s. This fragrance again has that same musk that the first fragrance has, but if the first fragrance is relatively unfriendly, the first one is just fresh, quite functional kind of fragrance. This one's a lot sweeter, a lot easier. It's floral, it's pretty, but it definitely has a bit of a vintage feel to it. I think this would actually make a really good bedtime fragrance. It's got that sort of creamy, moisturising bath fragrance kind of feel to it. For an eau de cologne formulation, I was shocked by this one. It lasted at least 6 hours on my skin, and I did not expect that at all. This fragrance is really retro feeling. It makes me think of powder makeup compacts. If you like that kind of smell with a soapy floral kind of smell, then this fragrance could be for you. So that's Fresia. So the third fragrance is called Rosa Gardenia, and this fragrance is quite a white floral fragrance to begin with. It's verging on indolic for the first few minutes. The gardenia and the jasmine are really prominent for the first couple of minutes, but then it switches mainly to the gardenia. It's really quite a soapy fragrance, but with some strong white florals. And if there is rose here, it's mainly just a warmth and powderiness in the background rather than anything overtly rosy. I think it's just sort of a general pink feeling, this fragrance, whereas I don't really pick out anything particularly rosy. There's not anything too fresh here. The dry down of this fragrance is a slightly bitter feeling, but creamy white floral musk. The musk is very dense, and it's definitely a white musk. It's also got a bit of a solar feeling, this fragrance, somehow. Not quite sure how, but yeah, it just feels a little bit sunny, this one. So this fragrance was really strong for me, and it's something that did last quite a long time on my skin too. And I was again a bit shocked by how long something in an eau de cologne formulation did last. I think this one, if you aren't into white florals, if you aren't into powdery fragrances, this is not going to be for you. It is really quite dense, this one, and it can be overwhelming. I think this I would struggle with if I ever sprayed it. It just catches you. It's quite a dry fragrance almost, and I think that dryness along with those white florals that are slightly indolic and the powderiness can just be a bit much. But I did like this. I did think it was quite pretty overall, but just maybe not for me. So that's Rosa Gardenia. So the next fragrance is called Rosa Novella, and this is a slightly spicy red rose with patchouli and also a warm woody musk. As this dries down, the patchouli and the woody musk become more prominent, but somehow it gets a little bit fresher too. So there's not so much to say about this one. It's a relatively simple fragrance. It tends not to change too much in the dry down. This lasted about 4 to 5 hours on me. I think if you're someone who really likes fragrances like Portrait of a Lady, but finds that maybe a little bit overwhelming for everyday use, or perhaps you like things like Halfetti but think that's a little bit strong, maybe you want something without the leather, this would be a really good choice for a more gentle version of those kinds of fragrances. So that's Rosa Novella. So the next fragrance is called Angeli Di Firenze, and this fragrance really opens with a very beautiful, really very photorealistic kind of cantaloupe melon note. It's just like you've just sliced into a melon. That very quickly disappears though, and that's a shame because that's really just stunning at the beginning of this fragrance. So this quickly turns into something more along the lines of peach. It actually makes me think of the peach that's in Gucci Rush. There's also jasmine and there's a bit of a musk here as well. I think that's also making me think of Gucci Rush. So the peach note in Gucci Rush sometimes makes me think of latex, and I get exactly the same thing in this fragrance. I think of latex, and I also think of sort of something slightly more waxy. There's definitely textures here. This fragrance really isn't as soapy as the rest of the fragrances in this line. It's still musky, but it's definitely got more of a freshness to it. For me, I just didn't really enjoy that peach note on my skin. It just turned into latex for me, but I know that other people don't smell that with those peach notes. I think this fragrance was actually one of the more gentle ones. This lasted about 2 hours on my skin. But yeah, definitely worth checking out if you like aquatic florals. And the melon at the beginning is absolutely beautiful. So this is Angeli Di Firenze. So the next fragrance is called Melograno. And this one was one of the ones that most interested me from this discovery set, because this is the fragrance that Vesper Lynd wears in Casino Royale. A bottle of this fragrance is found in her handbag at the end of the film. And this fragrance was released in the 60s, so that kind of date really ties in with the James Bond kind of feel, doesn't it? Anyway, so I was really intrigued by this one, and because of it being called pomegranate, I was expecting something really fruity, really light, kind of Italian feeling. Did not get that at all. This fragrance is just pure Eva Green. If you think of how Eva Green is, you know, Eva Green's quite vampy, isn't she? She was someone who was used to advertise Midnight Poison when that was on the market. And I think this fragrance really fits with how she is as a person. So this fragrance is quite a green feeling, leathery chypre fragrance, but it's definitely on the lighter side of chypres. It definitely has some aldehydes in here. It's quite metallic, it's quite musky, but it just is quite fresh in a way. There's something uplifting that grows throughout the fragrance. I actually really enjoyed this one, even though this is not really my scent profile, even though it does have that kind of vintage vampy feel. I just thought it was quite an interesting fragrance. And I think for something that's, you know, an eau de cologne formulation, this lasted on my skin 4 or 5 hours. I thought it was actually quite a long-lasting fragrance considering the formulation as well. So I think this one is probably one of the ones that I would rate from this set. I think Melograno just definitely has a very vintage vampy feel that I think a lot of people might enjoy. So the next fragrance is called Tabacco Toscano, and this one really stood out to me from this set as being something completely different from the others. This one is very, very distinctive. So this is a sweet, powdery, slightly smoky tobacco vanilla fragrance, but with a leathery feel to it as well. So this opens with something that weirdly makes me think of smoked ham. It's like a smoked honey ham for about the first 30 seconds. And I think that's probably the guaiac wood and the vanilla that are mixing here and making me think of smoked ham. It's seriously weird to begin with. And I think if you're a veggie, it would really turn you off. But that goes very, very quickly. I think overall, this is a almost spicy, a little bit smoky, tobacco-y vanilla fragrance, but still with a hint of leather in the dry down. I think this fragrance really stands out because nobody could really describe this one as soapy. And that is really what makes it distinctive from the other fragrances in this set. I think this fragrance would really appeal to people who like gentle tobacco vanillas, ambery vanillas, resinous vanillas, leathery vanillas. I think this really covers quite a lot of different ground, and it's something that I've never really smelt anything exactly like this before. It's very much its own fragrance, so it's very distinctive. And I think, you know, this is definitely a signature fragrance kind of smell. I don't think anybody would fail to recognise this one on you. I think it's very, very distinctive. So that's Tabacco Toscano. So the next fragrance is called Pourri, and this one was not at all how I imagined it to smell from the name. So Pourri, you think of florals, don't you? This is definitely not that. This is very much more along the lines of an aromatic, even a spicy fragrance. So to begin with, the rosemary is front and centre. There's something cool, almost menthol smelling in the background. I assume that's the Peru balsam. And there's something green and bitter in the back of the fragrance. It smells something along the lines of clove, but with something else as well. As this dries down, it begins to make me think of pine forests. You still do keep that kind of cool menthol smell, but it definitely lessens. And the forest is kind of peppered with cloves and rosemary. It doesn't really evolve too much apart from the cloves really amp up in the dry down. It becomes quite an overall, overwhelmingly clovey fragrance. And I'm not a massive fan of cloves when they're really strong in fragrances. And I found this one a little bit overwhelming for me. This one actually lasted pretty long on me and it was quite strong. I probably got about 4 hours out of this. I think if you really love cloves, this might be the fragrance for you. So that's Pourri. So now we're on to the Eau de Parfums. And the first sample that I chose on my order was called Bizzarria. So Bizzarria, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is a very, very strange fragrance. I've never smelled anything like this. So this is a zingy, bitter orange fragrance with a bit of greenness to begin with. It's warm and almost peppery. It actually makes me think of laurel leaves. So you know that kind of green, bitter, slightly waxy smell you get with laurel leaves, but with a bitter orange over the top of it. To begin with, the bitter orange can smell almost along the lines of grapefruit, but as this dries down, it becomes spicier, it becomes woodier, and there's definitely more of a herbal green edge to it. Since this was an EDP, I was expecting this one to last a bit longer, and I think it probably was sort of on a par with the longest lasting of the eau de colognes in this selection, but it still wasn't super long lasting. I think this lasted about 4 or 5 hours on me. I thought this fragrance was really different, and I think if you really like sort of spicier fragrances, this might be a really good one to check out. It was really distinctive. Actually made me think of Halloween, actually. It's got that kind of pumpkin-y, spices, chai kind of smell to it, but with some citrus. I thought it was interesting. So that's Bizzarria. So the final fragrance is called Gelsomino, and this is a solar-feeling citrus jasmine fragrance. The jasmine here is along the lines of something more green. It's definitely a fresher jasmine. And I think really as this starts to dry down, the jasmine becomes slightly more indolic and it becomes quite petally. It's a very, very realistic jasmine for me, and I think the jasmine is really my favourite part of this fragrance. As this begins to dry down, you get some more bright, sunshiny, ylang-ylang. It's very yellow feeling, but still bright, sweet and musky. I think this fragrance is probably one of the more mainstream offerings from this house that I've tried. I think this one, even though it is quite a common scent profile to smell, it still is quite distinctive. It's not something that I could equate with any kind of modern designer fragrance that I've smelt. Even though solar feeling fragrances are really one of my favourite categories, I can't say I've smelt anything quite like this one before. I think the thing that really makes it distinctive is the jasmine. The jasmine is really interesting in this fragrance, and I think that really makes it stand out. So yeah, I really like this one. It lasted about 4 or 5 hours on my skin. I definitely wear this one again. So that's Gelsomino. So just to sum up my thoughts on this fragrance house, I think most of these fragrances feel to me like they're for warmer weather. They are definitely for a warmer climate than somewhere like the UK. I feel like wearing most of these in winter would just be a no. They're definitely more summery, these fragrances. Even the darker ones feel more summery, more light, more uplifting. Considering most of these are eau de colognes, to get 4 or 5 hours out of an eau de cologne is pretty good going. So I'm not really going to hold that against them. I think there are several fragrances in this set that do share a very distinctive soapy musk that I think a lot of people might struggle with. But there are fragrances here that don't have that soapy musk. And I think there are some quite distinctive standout fragrances here that are definitely worth a sniff. I think if you do happen to be in Florence, I'd really recommend going to visit the pharmacy and seeing where these were originally made. I think it's really fascinating and I love the story behind these fragrances. So ranking these, I'm going to put Angeli Di Firenze in 10th place. That latexy feel in that fragrance really wasn't for me in the dry down, but I absolutely loved the opening with the cantaloupe melon. I thought that was really distinctive and really fun. In 9th place, I'm going to put Rosa Gardenia. Whilst I liked it, I just found it a little bit overwhelming. The musk was really quite strong. It was a very powdery fragrance for me. And the white florals were quite strong in that one. So that one's my number 9. Number 8, I'm going to put Acqua Della Regina. It was just quite citrusy, quite soapy, quite something that I've smelt before. You know, there are other fragrances that I did suggest that were very similar to that one. And whilst I did prefer Acqua Della Regina to the others, it's just not really me, that kind of scent profile. In 7th place, I'm going to put Pourri. The cloves were just a bit too much for me in that fragrance, but I did think it was an interesting fragrance overall. And I think if you really like rosemary, if you really like menthol feeling fragrances, that might be a good one to check out. 6th place would be Melograno. I really liked the kind of summer vamp feeling of that fragrance, but I also think that it's just something that I wouldn't end up wearing. But I think if you really love chypres and you want something for the summer, that might be a really nice fragrance for you. Number 5 would be Bizzarria. It really was something that I hadn't smelt before and I found it interesting. But again, I don't think it was necessarily me. So number 4 is going to be Fresia. I just thought it was a nice sort of powdery, makeup-y kind of smell. Whilst it still was quite floral, I thought it was quite distinctive. And I think my top 3 are probably going to be number 3, Gelsomino. It's just a scent profile that I like, and I really like the distinctive jasmine in that fragrance. I really like the citrusy feel in the dry down too. I thought that was really interesting. So that's my number 3, Gelsomino. Number 2, I'm going to choose Tabacco Toscano. For a vanilla, I thought it was very, very distinctive. I thought it was really interesting. Even though it smelled of ham at the beginning, I thought it was just a very distinctive fragrance. And I think really with vanillas, I'm not looking for straight up vanillas. I'm looking for something that's a bit strange. And that one was definitely a bit strange. But I also just think that it would make an excellent kind of signature fragrance. I can see why that one gets so much love. My number 1 here is going to be quite a boring one in a way because it's just a scent profile that I like, but I just thought it was very pretty. And whilst it wasn't a complicated fragrance, I just thought it would be the one that I would end up wearing the most. And that was Rosa Novella. It was a spicy, rosy, patchouli fragrance. And I just thought it was really nice and gentle. I thought it was very wearable for the summer. It was very much like a summer version of Halfetti or a summer version of Portrait of a Lady. Along those kinds of lines. And yeah, I just thought it was pretty. So that's my number 1, Rosa Novella. So please let me know if you have tried any Santa Maria Novella fragrances yourself, if you've been to the monastery, the pharmacy where these were originally made. I'd also be interested to hear your thoughts on that. Have you been to Florence? Do you love it as much as I did? So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have enjoyed the video, then please press the like button and please also consider subscribing if you haven't done already. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.